So, okay. So good morning, everyone. I am not Mark Davis. I am Sujin Ko, and I'm stepping in for Mark today while he's at the pastor's retreat and getting refreshed and enjoying the company of other pastors. I'm a little nervous, but also looking forward to doing this text study with you today. Hopefully you all had a chance to watch the video before this morning, and I've provided a little handout. This is something that Mark actually had basically prepared, but I just adjusted it a little bit so that it would sort of reflect what he was saying in the video a little more closely. So I will go ahead and do the first reading, and then we'll go from there. But I say to you that listen, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you. If anyone strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. And from anyone who takes away your coat, do not withhold even your shirt. Give to everyone who begs from you. And if anyone takes away your goods, do not ask for them again. Do to others as you would have them do to you. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners love those who love them. If you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners do the same. If you lend to those from whom you hope to receive, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners to receive as much again. But love your enemies, do good and lend, expecting nothing in return. Your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High. He is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. Do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, will be put into your lap. For the measure you give, will be the measure you get back. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So, what is this reading about? And I guess I'm also curious. I was hoping that we could, have a little bit more of a conversation today. I don't know how Mark typically does it, but I'm just kind of curious. This is probably a very familiar passage to many of you. And I'm just curious what kind of memories it evoked for you from reading it in the past. Oh, okay, great.
There may be some responses. It makes me think of fighting with people.
It makes you think of fighting with people. How so?
So in my undergrad, sometimes I hand out flyers at the room hop for working for a women's philanthropic organization.
Uh-huh.
And there was a guy who wanted to fight with us about, I don't know why once, but he got into well, what about this? What about this Christianity? And I don't know why he was engaging me on Christianity, but it was all these things well, a real man wouldn't wear the cheek, wouldn't do this. And so he was kind of trying to push back on this. So I remember engaging with this guy. I think he was a Jehovah's Witness.
Okay.
I think we were doing a blood drive was why he was arguing with me.
Oh, okay.
But
Okay.
I just remember him saying kind of the negative of these things to me, but I knew this well enough to say hold on.
Right.
And so I remember it in sort of intense
Right.
conversation.
Okay. So Jen was just talking about how when she was in college, she was doing it was a blood drive kind of related thing. Okay. She was handing out flyers for a blood drive, and she got into an argument with somebody who was saying how, I guess maybe a Jehovah's Witness, and they were disagreeing. So I guess this kind of evoked the memory of this passage because she was in a conflict with somebody else, and they were saying that Christianity was not about turning the other cheek, but it was about something else. And so they were, that kind of, that memory kind of evoked this passage for her.
I think that
Go ahead.
this, part of it, I think, to me, is kind of a leavening. It's like trying to bring here, here, to here. If we all feel more receptive to everybody and what they do, the classes are less. In other words, we get kind of more on a playing field. And when you're on the playing field, there are rules that you can follow to keep yourself from more or less going off on some or criticizing. And that's what we're trying to do now in our life. You know, keep things so that we don't burst out. But I don't think he's, you know, Bible's funny, but I think that he's saying, of course, sinful things are sinful things, but doing good should just be a part of your life. In other words, what you do.
Okay.
If we could get to that,
Right.
it would be ideal, but you know.
Okay. So the act of doing good is, Shirley is saying, so that maybe that the act of doing good is kind of an equalizer or helps to kind of balance the dynamics in society. And we can maybe also read in the rest of what is being sort of spoken by Jesus, that we should kind of behave in these certain situations in a certain way so that we can kind of equalize different forces in society. Is that correct?
It sounds good.
Okay, all right, great. Go ahead, Jen. Yeah.
There's two from the chat.
Okay.
So Betty shared that she's frequently heard this slap and turn the other cheek interpretation that Mark mentioned.
Okay.
In the last 20 years or so, and it's never quite sat right. Mark's take sounds more plausible, where it's not about letting people abuse you.
Right.
And then the other is Beryl shared that she's found verses 27 through 30, which starts out, I say to you, love your enemies, do good for those who hate you, and when it strikes you, turn the other cheek. She's found that to be aspirational, but seldom realistic.
Okay. So great, two good observations. So so Betty was saying how it, you know, this kind of the turning the other cheek has often been used to justify abuse. And that was something that Mark spent a lot of time on the video kind of trying to deconstruct and say, no, it's not meant to be for those who are not in positions of power, who are marginalized or in lower positions, but it's speaking to those who are in power, right? And so, and yes, I do think that we have kind of heard that particular verse used a lot to sort of justify continued endurance of abuse or violence in particular situations. So that's a good point, Betty. And Beryl, I think, you know, your sort of observation about how this is supposed to be aspirational, but not necessarily realized, kind of points to the challenge and the difficulty of this whole passage, actually. I think it's something, this passage is a passage that is very familiar to us. We've heard it a lot. And, you know, as we go into it more deeply, you know, we've often heard the golden rule, and that, you know, that's something that it's so familiar. You see it on fortune cookies, you know, like things. And so it's almost like we take it for granted. And yet it is a hard saying. These are some challenging sayings that Jesus is putting in front of us. So great. Any other thoughts before we move on?
Betty, I have to
Okay,
clarify.
sure.
The recent interpretation being backhanded or left-handed slap was being degraded in the ancient world.
Can you say a little bit more about that? Or?
She was clarifying that Mark's recent interpretation about the left-handed or backhanded.
Oh,
slap.
okay. Oh, okay. Yes. So yes, so, sort of about how he's kind of talking about why you should kind of take that instead of the abusive kind of position that people often try to justify through that. Okay. Yes.
And one
Thank you.
more question,
Yes.
comment came up. Jerry shares that his audience lived under the boot of the Romans. How is he not saying submit? How is this not saying submit?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jerry. And I don't necessarily know if I have the answer to that, but I think that's something that we should keep in mind. Go ahead. Somebody raised their hand on the Zoom. Do you know who that is?
It might be that raised the hand.
Yeah.
I appreciate you being here and leading us in this discussion. There's another group that I belong to, and in that group, we talk a lot about the advantages of humility. And a lot of people seem to have what I would call a misunderstanding of humility. And there's a statement that we use quite often that humility is not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less, meaning that it gives us time to think of others more. And this passage spoke to me about that, that when we do something for somebody else in a kind deed, we don't necessarily have to believe that they're going to do something good for us. We just need to do it because we know that that's what is expected of us from God, who made me and who made me as an imperfect person, but who is trying to be following what Jesus is saying on the plane. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you. And would you mind saying your name, because I don't know.
Adeline Sivra.
Oh, no, it's Adeline. Okay. My iPhone was so small, I couldn't see your face.
Yeah,
Hi,
I know.
good to see you.
Thank you,
yes.
Suji.
Yes, go ahead, Shirley.
You know, I think it comes into this. I've been reading a lot of material the last 5 or 10 years on Black Lives Matter. And the book I'm reading right now is His Truth is Marching On by John Meacham, John Lewis.
Mhm.
But it goes extensively into the nonviolent part where the bus riders, they make this vow that no matter what's done to them, they will not retaliate.
Right.
And when you read about it, I mean, these are severe moments. And I was thinking about that when I was reading this chapter, because they're doing it just because they're entitled to go into a restaurant, or they should be. But that is more or less, they're doing what the Bible says, let men revile you, you still do the right thing. And they're trying to set a precedent that we should do this. And it's hard to read, you know, and it's hard to believe that that happened. And yet it's true.
Yeah.
There's a lot of that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's great. I think, and I think actually, I don't know if you heard what Shirley was saying, but Jerry, I actually think that might respond to your question in part. She was talking about how she's reading a book right now called The Truth is Marching On by John Lewis and John Meacham.
It's John Lewis's life.
And they were kind of talking about how they, I mean, you know, we often think about nonviolence as a very passive kind of posture, but actually the discipline and the training that was required to continue to be nonviolent in the face of violence is something that it took a lot of self-control and discipline. And so I wonder if that could, you know, start to answer your question, Jerry. But you do kind of, Adeline does raise a good point about this passage, because we often confuse sort of self denigration or kind of putting ourselves down. We sort of mistake that for humility, a kind of humility that is sort of recognizing the humanity in the other person that we're kind of dealing with, and also realizing that we ourselves are imperfect. And so I think that that might be a way for, you know, that we should kind of hold that that question in mind about when is it when we are actually sort of thinking less of ourselves in a way that is harmful, and actually practicing true humility in the way that this passage might be encouraging. Okay, yeah, go ahead, Jen.
And then,
Yes.
There's a little more discussion.
Yeah.
In chat. So Beryl responding to Jerry said, you might take issue with Mark's belief that Jesus was speaking to people who have power and choice, but surely their power was limited by their political circumstances. So
Okay.
the video how Mark talked about.
Oh, yes.
You do have some choice.
Right,
And
yes.
So how do we negotiate? Were they powerless in Rome? Was
Right.
there some choice about how to treat other people?
Right, exactly. So yes, so maybe that's pointing to a more sort of nuanced kind of understanding of the power dynamics that are at play, because even I think people who are marginalized and oppressed, they do have agency. They do have choices that they can make in any particular situation. So I think that's a good point. All right, so here if we don't have any more questions, we'll keep moving along. I wasn't here last week, so I'm wondering how you feel like the context of this passage kind of fits into what you have kind of been studying so far in the series. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
I put
Yeah.
that to the chat, so if anyone wants to respond. But the blessings and woes, we kind of got into that shame honor continuum, which made a lot more sense, I think, as we talked about it. And then looking at this as sort of a continuation of what is it to be shameful, experience shame, or what is it to how you treat other people, like how that your individual choices, or not even individuals, how we live
Mhm.
kind of can challenge those ways of honor and shame, especially the kind of, you know, back of the hand.
Right,
hitting
right.
someone or
Yes.
taking someone that Mark got into near the end of the video.
Right.
I think it puts that in context.
Yes.
That having last week's discussion helps me to see how this can continue out of that same paradigm.
Right. That's great. So shame and honor, that shame and honor paradigm is actually sort of a good way to kind of frame this passage, because we often think of it, when I was growing up, I often was told that this is really a passage about doing right or wrong, which there is part of that, it's an ethic. But it also, I think what is helpful about the shame and honor kind of paradigm is that it kind of, that paradigm really hits at the core of your sense of self and your understanding of who the other person is in relation to that sense of self, and how that person actually, it's not like you're not in a vacuum. It's about your relationship with other people. And so I think that that shame and honor paradigm, it's useful to keep that in mind, because it's not just about a discrete act that is happening in any point in time, right or wrong, but it's about shame and honor, about how you are relating to the other person and how you are kind of together in that same social ecosystem. So thanks for that, Jen. So in this passage, yesterday in the video, Mark had kind of gone through the different ethics that he felt like were being portrayed in the different verses. And I'm wondering, would it be helpful if we kind of went through that slowly, one by one, and kind of talked about what was going on in each verse? Or how would you like to do that?
Whatever works for you.
Well, I kind of like to get the input from you, so yeah.
Well, people
Yeah.
consider there was a comment from Beryl.
Okay, great.
Just observing this is one of the longest speeches of Jesus and seems to be one that Luke wants to emphasize.
Okay, so good. Yes, it is very long. I mean, it goes all the way. I mean, you'll be continuing it up through next week at least. So good.
It does, I do realize what you're saying. It's important because when I read that little sentence here that says, offering the other cheek and the shirt, or also the abuse and vengeance. When I was talking about the Black people and the nonviolent, they're not doing it for abuse or vengeance. They are, whereas in a marital couple, say somebody's abusing one or the other, it's a whole different thing.
Mhm.
So there is a lot of, like you said, differences there that we have to be aware of
Right.
for that sort of thing.
Yeah, but actually it's also, I mean, I'm glad you raised that point. They're not doing it for abuse or vengeance, but they are doing it for justice, right?
That's it.
And the
That's what I'm
thing
saying.
about, even in a relationship, in an abusive relationship, it's wrong. It's a matter of justice. It's not just a matter of, just sort of like a personal kind of conflict or something like that. It's a matter of justice,
There's a
right?
purpose there
Yes.
that's going to help others ahead, whereas in a personal abuse type thing,
Right.
nothing good's coming from that.
Right, exactly. So let's look at those 3 verses that kind of talk about an alternative ethics. So it says, but I say to you that listen, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you. If anyone strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. And from anyone who takes away your coat, do not withhold even your shirt. Give to everyone who begs from you. And if anyone takes away your goods, do not ask for them again. So Mark has kind of framed this as an alternative ethics. How is it alternative? What are the things that Jesus is saying in this passage, or these 3 verses, that make it an alternative ethic? Go ahead.
Doesn't this take away from the original eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth?
Okay.
Is that what it's designed to do?
Okay, so sort of counteracting the eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, like the Hammurabi Code that we all learned about in elementary school. Yeah, that kind of thing. Yeah, maybe. I mean, that might be, but even like, yeah, so good. Jen, did you want to say something?
There's nodding in the
Oh,
chat.
there's nodding in the chat. Okay, okay, good.
Yeah, people are-
Okay, good.
And then there's a comment. too.
Okay, yes.
Much of it's opposite of how our society and our law operates.
Okay, so much of it is opposite of how our society and law operates. Good. So, so it really kind of, and why do you think that is? It really, do you think it is more natural for you to want to take an eye for an eye or a tooth for a tooth? You hope not. Okay, yes.
You think personality comes into that?
Maybe.
You know, if you're a mild, I mean, at this time in my life, when I look back, I think personality has a lot to do with a lot of things that we never alluded to, you know. Some
Sure.
people have to have counseling and stuff to guide their personality in the right way. So,
Mhm.
or someone else, you know, things can roll off their backs.
Right. So there could be like the way that we react in any given situation could also just be a matter of personality differences. Okay, yeah.
But I do think that this says that we're supposed to find a way to deal with that.
Mhm.
I think a lot of kids that, I don't know if you've had kids yet, go through the developmental stage of justice.
Yes,
Where once, like, this is not fair, and that's
Yes.
not okay, it's
Yes.
justice, and I
Yes.
wouldn't take that, and it wasn't fair.
right.
And like just how hardwired that is in kids.
Yeah.
For there to be a sense of equal justice, and that's
Right.
not necessarily something we're teaching them on purpose.
Right.
But that is something, whether that's just in the human spirit or human character,
Right.
or
Yeah.
that's, fear of scarcity,
Yeah.
but there is that like, real early, real strong
Right.
understanding that things should be fair.
Right. Yeah. I mean, when my sister and I were growing up, we're 4 years apart, and yeah, we do have different personalities. But yeah, if she hit me, I hit her right back. Because that was I felt like that was fair. That was how I expressed my sense of fairness. And even in our court of law, do you think that it is more like eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, or is it more of this alternative ethic that Jesus is pushing us towards?
Daryl's on your same page.
Okay.
She says, consider the principle of compensation. It's more like an eye for an eye than give your coat and your coat.
Right.
That the fair compensation in the law.
Right.
Case of law. Yeah.
Right. So not at all in court. What is
Carlene Oscar. does
Yes.
that.
maybe Carlene can clarify that a little more. So yeah, I mean, maybe the part about striking somebody on your cheek and offering the other also is something that we might understand. We can understand Mark's explanation, but when it comes to possession, it's something a little different. Would you like to say something?
Well, the world situation today is certainly not we're not practicing these principles. I'm not sure what's going on.
Mhm.
The Russian situation is so dicey. And we really don't know
Mhm.
what they're thinking. They know what we're thinking, I believe, because I think it's been made clear,
Mhm.
but then it isn't.
Right.
It's just, we're just not practicing
Yeah.
the rules.
So the world,
Not my bias.
yeah. So the world, I'm sorry, what's your name?
Jane,
Jane. Okay, great. So Jane was saying how even with the situation with Russia, you know, we're kind of at this standoff, right? And we are trying to figure out what the other side is doing. And so the world of military intelligence, it is not about this alternative ethic, right? And even sort of this idea of possession, I think that is so deeply ingrained in the American identity in terms of you know, the land that we stand on, in terms of just, you know, ideas about home ownership or, you know, buying things. I think that is so deeply ingrained in the American psyche that this is actually a very hard thing, I think, for us to consider. And so just kind of hold that in your mind. Was Carlene able to kind of clarify more?
No follow-up yet.
Okay, no follow-up. Okay, that's fine. Okay, great. Are there any other questions about this alternative ethic passage?
I do think though, what she's talking about, the important thing is people who have the young children now. If it doesn't start with them, and if parents aren't able to make the children understand at that young age, that's why we have, I think, so much tyranny
Mhm.
in the later years. I
Mhm.
mean, it should be a formative type thing.
Right.
You know, that's problem with the South.
Mhm.
You know, they're still living in Civil War,
Mhm.
more or less, and by the color of your skin.
Mhm.
But I mean, if those children are taught differently there, which they're not, so
Mhm.
it's scary.
Yeah. Yeah.
I pray for all the young people that have children now.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, I think though we're all taught though from an early age in school that there are consequences to what you do, right? And you have to do the right thing. If you don't do the right thing, then there will be consequences, right? And so if you are sort of formed with that kind of understanding of consequences, then how can we expect others to kind of take up that alternative ethic that Jesus is talking about here?
Martin Luther says it's always the right time to do the right thing.
It's always the right time to do the right thing. That's a good saying. Yeah. Okay, great. So if we don't have any more questions, we can move on to the golden rule. And here Mark had also kind of provided a nice little diagram on the second half of the sheet about how the golden rule is sort of expressed in different faith traditions. Do to others as you would have them do to you. And sometimes we hear this kind of phrase, not negatively, but kind of like with Confucianism, they say, do not do to others what you do not want done to yourself. So that's a little different from the way that it's expressed here in Luke. Any thoughts about this or ideas? Go
There's a
ahead.
comment
Yeah,
from the chat.
sure.
So Betty clarified that eye for an eye was supposed to be a more just action because usually we tend to retaliate with more power, right? So eye for an eye at a level of level things up and take what he's taken from you. But then she echoes Carlene's take, courts usually punish harder than the equal measure of the punishment fitting for crime.
Okay, so courts tend to be more punitive. Is that what? Okay.
Yes, and then Carlene said right, Betty. So she,
Right, Betty, it's not chess, but checkers?
yes.
Okay.
Yes, and the trigger.
Okay,
So the way that courts can punish harder than
right,
what is deserved.
right,
Imbalance.
right. Good. Yeah, so thanks, Betty, for that observation about how, even eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth is supposed to sort of even out the power dynamics that are at play. So that's good. Any thoughts about the golden rule or about this particular verse?
I was gonna say, I've seen sort of a Christian supremacist thing done, where they're like, well, everyone else had the silver rule, but we had the golden rule.
Oh,
And I
okay.
was trying to sort of like say, like, well, they said not, but we said do.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I think
Yes.
it's not a great argument.
Yeah. Okay.
And so I urge caution.
Okay. Yeah. Great. Yeah. No, that's interesting because yes, I think I've heard something like that too, about how this is a more superior kind of expression of the golden rule that is kind of shared across faith traditions. But Mark talks about it as an ego perspective ethics. So what did he mean by that in the video?
Say that again.
He talked about it as an ego perspective ethics. Yeah.
Well, don't you think ethics is one of the things that we're lacking more in the world than anything else?
Sure.
But
So
you think that is all related?
I think, well, these are all different kinds of ethics that he's kind of laid out. I wanted to focus more on the ego perspective part of that. Yeah. I think he was making a distinction between ego perspective and egocentric or egotistic, right? And so what is an ego perspective ethics?
We clarified that egocentric has taken a bad implication, so it's an ego
Right.
perspective, that it's from the perspective, what would I want?
Yes.
Right? Applying your perspective to others.
Right.
Giving other people the same grace. you give
Right.
yourself.
So actually seeing yourself in the other person, right? So seeing if we are made in the image of God, we see the image of God in the other person reflected back at us. And that is what determines our behavior and our attitude towards others. And I, like Jen said, I kind of grew up hearing that the golden rule, as it's kind of expressed in scripture, as a kind of superior version of the golden rule, as opposed to other faith traditions. But seeing the similarities, or seeing how there are common, the golden rule functions as a kind of common thread among all these faith traditions, also allows us to see the image of God in those other faith traditions as well. And so I think that there's something to be said about that ego perspective ethics. Jane, did you want to say something? Or okay, we're just listening. Okay, yeah. So
I think that you probably don't mind me talking.
no.
But it's so funny because when I look back on my children, I came from a very closed evangelical home, but my mother and father were actually considered liberals
Mhm.
in evangelical.
Oh, okay.
My dad was kind of,
Mhm.
but that's who he was.
Mhm.
But I say all that because I was, my life with my children for a long time was very difficult. And I couldn't always get to church on Sunday because I had 2 jobs. But teaching my children the difference between right and wrong from the beginning of my life was so important.
Mhm.
And it was always about what is right, ethics, this. And I say this as a funny because about a couple of months ago, I was with my family in a group, and my older son was talking to somebody, and we were talking about young kids nowadays, how important it is that you can't go into a candy store and take a piece of candy off the shelf and think it's okay. And my older son said, yeah, she says, I can't believe it. She raised Cain with me because I told her we went to the drive-in movie and I got in the trunk so that we didn't have to pay for so many guys.
Oh.
And I remembered that. I was
Right.
so upset. I said, you're taking money from in other words, everything they did, I tried to explain to them.
Yes.
And I've forgotten all of that stuff.
Mhm,
But
mhm.
every so often when I'm listening to my family, something will come out. You don't do those kind of things around mom.
Right.
But that's kind of ethics. I mean, if you don't learn that stuff
Yeah.
at a young age, it's, for me, I understand a lot of things that are happening because people don't understand what ethics ever met.
Mhm.
And that's enough for me. I'm sorry.
Oh, no,
I
it's
was
okay.
thinking- I was thinking about that. You know,
Yeah,
I said,
right.
she got mad because I didn't pay for my way into the drive-in.
Right.
The drugstore.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I mean, so
that's wrong.
yeah, it is wrong.
That's it.
But we're formed to sort of, I mean, the way that we teach our children and the way that we kind of think about what is right is to pay for something, right? We pay for something and then it is ours, right?
Yes,
But what if you have to give what you've paid for to somebody else?
there's a word for that. Compassion.
Compassion. So that's compassion. Okay.
Okay.
So is it hard or is it easy? It depends.
Yeah, I think so too.
Okay. So talk about that a
My
little bit.
route to the church takes me by the transit center. And today there are 50 tents or sleeping bag
Yeah.
little gatherings. That colors my day
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
a certain extent.
Right.
I don't go by there every day, but
Mhm.
these kinds of inequities are so apparent.
Yeah.
We can't turn, we just can't turn away
Right.
from what's going on.
Right. Yeah, that's true. I mean, right on,
And yet I don't know.
yeah, it's hard because right on this road, San Joaquin Hills, there is a sign right by the traffic light that says something about panhandling. Like don't like don't give or send them to something else, to a
They don't
shelter.
understand on the corner.
Yes, exactly. So there's an idea that, yeah, maybe like there's a right way to give as well. And there's a kind of like, and then when I do see panhandlers and they have a sign up, I don't usually give them money, right? Even though maybe this is what Jesus is pressing us to do. I don't know.
I mean, I'm conflicted there.
Yeah,
I used to a lot. And then I had some friends say, don't do that, Shirley.
Right.
They're probably driving big cars. And I had a war with myself, but then I thought, then that's their problem, not mine.
Right.
I mean, if I give them something because I think they need it,
Mhm.
what they're using with it once I give it to them isn't my responsibility.
Right. So actually, though, this whole situation in that context kind of raises a question of what is right,
I know.
right?
It is.
It's not so obvious, right? And so, so that's kind of, I think, the challenge of that ego perspective ethics. When that panhandler is asking, that person is asking, that unhoused person is asking for money, do we see ourselves in them or are we seeing someone else?
It's true.
So I think that is actually more challenging than we usually give it credit for.
That's what I like
Yeah.
about St. Mark, through the deacons and all.
Mhm.
We do, we do our best, we try, and we give as much as we can. And probably more, but I mean, it's evident what we're doing. I've
Mhm.
never been in a church before that it was so evident that we were also taking care of people outside the church as in the church. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I'm not criticizing any place I've ever been,
Right,
but it's visible here
right,
that's on the forefront.
right. Yeah, no, I mean, I think this is the first church that I've been part of where the deacons actually are assigned to a ministry outside or like an organization outside of the church rather than being assigned to different people within the church. And so, yeah, that I think commitment to social justice is very apparent. But even when we're making decisions about who we should be giving our money to, we are sort of calculating a metric. We are using a metric, and I'm not saying it's bad or whatever, but it's natural. This is something that we're used to doing. We're assigning a metric to determine who is worthy of our money, right? And in this kind of scenario, the way that it's framed here, it almost seems visceral, like just do it, right? Don't even think about it, just do it, right? Almost. Was there anything in the chat or? Okay.
Just, what's
Okay.
happening.
Okay, great. So in verses 32 and 34, it says, if you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners love those who love them. If you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners do the same. If you lend to those from whom you hope to receive, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners to receive as much again. So this is kind of a comparative ethics, and I think we're already going into this sort of area of comparative ethics because we are distinguished. We see how we do distinguish ourselves from other people when we are making decisions about who we should give our possessions to, right? And so who do you think is a sinner, like in verses 32 through 34? We don't talk that much about sin, actually, in normally. So
Judgment call.
it's a judgment call. Okay, so can you give a little more?
It's hard to define.
Okay.
Probably stepping off the short cliff.
That's okay.
Isn't, after all, by the way,
Oh,
isn't it one of our basic Presbyterian, this church tenets that we are all broken,
mhm,
are all
Yes.
sinners?
right,
So this applies to both sides of the equation,
right,
whether we're the sinner or the person getting to a decision, they're the sinner as well.
right, right. So that's good. Yeah. So in our Reformed tradition, we are told that all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And so we maybe should identify ourselves as the sinner in this scenario. But sinners, I think, yeah, you're right. I think who we kind of think of as a sinner, that is partly a judgment call in the sense that it's contextual, right?
Some of us is not.
Right, right. But we do make judgment calls every day, don't we? We watch television and we see that, I don't know, anti-vaxxer or something, and they're saying things that you just do not understand. And maybe you wouldn't say that they're a sinner, but they're wrong, right? Or you think they're wrong. And how can I see myself? How can I love that person, right? And so actually, the other day, I read two different op-eds in the New York Times. One was by James Martin, who is a Jesuit priest, and he's a popular writer and speaker, and I love him. And then the other one was Charles Blow, who is also, he's an African-American writer, and he writes frequently on issues of race and Black Lives Matters. And I love both of what they have to say. And Charles Blow was saying how he had gotten to a point where he was angry at people who refused to get vaccinated. He just could not understand. And he had kind of reached his limit because so many people had died. So many people had gotten sick, were in the hospital, and numbers were still rising. And he said, before the vaccine was available, I kind of understood, I understood if people didn't want a mask or whatever, but now that we have a solution and science has shown us that this is a solution, I don't understand, right? And then James Martin was saying, when you see like an anti-vaxxer who has died from COVID, don't rejoice. Don't say, oh, I told you so. Or, well, it's a very natural feeling, that feeling of, he used that German word, Schadenfreude, sort of rejoicing in another person's suffering. And
Just have to feel sad.
yeah, you feel sad, you can feel sad, but there are people who are sort of mocking, who are mocking those people who have died as well. And so, karma, exactly. And so I thought those were really two different op-eds to kind of hold together in tension, because I understand Charles Blow's anger. but I also understand what James Martin is also saying, right? And so
Winnie the Pooh called it a conundrum.
a conundrum, yes. The Tao of Winnie the Pooh, yes, a conundrum. So
Sorry.
yeah, no, it's okay. Yeah, I like Winnie the Pooh. So yeah, so it's really I think we're in an environment and in a context right now where things are so polarized that it is really hard for us to actually, I think, see ourselves in somebody who we are really different from. And we may not necessarily, we might not go as far as to identify them as a sinner, but the people that we think who are wrong, it is hard to love them, right? It is hard to love them, and it is hard. But Jesus is saying here, if you love those who love you, if you love your family members, although I know family dynamics can get fraught and complicated, if you love your family members or your friends, that's easy. It's easy for you to do that. Can you really love those who are different from you?
I was always taught that you could love even if you did not like.
Mm-hmm.
Do you believe? I mean, do you think
Oh,
that's
love,
true?
but not like.
I don't know. When I was
Yeah.
young, my dad told me that, when I was young and evangelic, smoking, drinking, betting, cards, those were all sins.
Uh-huh.
But my dad said, those aren't sins. He
Mhm.
said, what is a sin? He said, look at the Bible at what Jesus said were the friends of the Spirit, all those relationships. He said, breaking those against people, that's a sin.
Mm-hmm.
So I was taught that the sin was more what came out of me towards someone else
Mm-hmm.
than what I put into my body. That's
Mhm.
my own bad habit,
Right,
which kind of made a difference to me as I grew up.
right.
I still didn't drink, but
Yeah. Right.
But that's why I always wondered, I've heard that expression, "Oh, I love you, but I don't like what you do."
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Shirley was saying, I've heard that. Yeah, you can love somebody, but you don't have to like them.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think John, what do you think?
Well,
Yeah.
Les may want to unmute and ask the question.
Okay.
He's raised
Oh,
his
okay.
hand.
Go ahead.
I'm going to ask who wants to. Yeah, it's not looking at this.
Oh, okay.
Well, wait, there's a few comments.
Okay.
Betty just put, said, clarifying, someone else is the sinner, it's never me.
Okay.
Bill shared, it seems to me the sinner in this verse is used in the context of the society in which the conversation is taking place. Sinners were those that were not accepted by the Jewish leaders.
Okay. So sinners are not, okay. So somebody who is outside of the circle of acceptance for maybe a variety of reasons by the Jewish leaders.
I looked up the Greek since Mark
Sure.
was here, tell us all the Greek.
Yeah, yeah.
To see like what were the distinctions with sinners, because we all
Right.
are sinners. But can sometimes be used as those devoted to sin,
Mm-hmm.
or those who are preeminently sinful or especially wicked. So sinners can take on those tones as well, which do require those sort of judgment calls.
Yeah.
Or who you would call that.
Right. Yeah, so there's a judgment call, but it also here actually, and I like Bill's observation because it kind of shows up, it shows how, and kind of builds on what Shirley was saying, how sinner is about your relationship to that person, right? About whether or not you want to associate with them. It's not, and it's by virtue of what they are doing or saying or thinking, but when it comes down to it, it's about who you want to associate with as well, right? So it's kind of a relational term. It's not just about what they are actually doing. So good. Any more thoughts about that? Yeah.
John Knox, we're not patrons or idle beggars who running from place to place make a craft of their begging. So I think he was saying on that question of whether or not we give money.
Oh,
People were asking for money.
Okay.
That was just a
oh,
John
okay.
Knox. So we're not the patrons for those who beg.
Okay,
John Knox
got it.
quote.
Mhm. Good.
Carlene added, what about Herod or Hitler, who truly believed that their actions were beneficial? I don't know if they believe their actions were beneficial.
Well, I think maybe Hitler did. I mean, I don't know about her, but you know, I mean, eugenics. You in the eugenics, it means good, right? So there's this idea that even though we might find eugenics abhorrent, that there's some kind of idea of doing it for the good, right? And so, what do you do with that? Well, that's a difficult question. I mean, how do we? I mean, and I think it raises a good question about distinguishing between sin and evil, right? And so, I don't know exactly how to answer that question, but it's a good question.
Then it's not the barrel. So when we get to verse 35,
Mm-hmm.
which we're not quite to yet,
Yeah.
there, she says she appreciates the last part of the verse that the Most High is kind to the ungrateful and the selfish.
Mhm.
It reminds me of the verse about the rain falling on the just and the unjust. These are somewhat perplexing glimpses of the ethics of the Most High.
Right. Okay, so let's go into that. So, but love your enemies, do good, and lend, expecting nothing in return. Your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High, for he is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. So, who is the God of these verses? Do you think these verses are pointing to a different, to an idea that God's justice is different from our justice?
Not
Okay.
even that.
Okay, so yes. And how is it different?
Well, I don't think he's, so many years, I believe there was a faction that really lent itself to that God was fierce.
Mhm,
And I don't know whether they thought that's necessarily mean, but he was just a God of law, in other words.
Mhm, mhm. Right,
And which was a big turnoff for
Right.
a lot of people.
mhm,
From what I read, especially in the New Testament, I mean, the Old Testament is history, a different time and a different place. And 200 years from now, it's going to be different for people here than we, I
Mhm.
try to keep that. But I always felt the New Testament was a message on how we were to live.
mhm,
And,
mhm.
and that makes a difference. But the Old Testament God, he was according to them, he was fire and brimstone and all of that.
mhm.
I think in the New Testament, he's compassionate,
Mhm.
merciful.
Mhm.
He sheds grace to us because he has grace himself.
Mhm.
And that's where I'm going.
Right, yeah, I do think that there is that stereotype of the Old Testament God being sort of fire and brimstone and a judge who wants to punish, and that the New Testament is about kindness and compassion. But I think we also should hold in mind that the God that Jesus is talking about in the New Testament is the God of the Old Testament, and that those we do need to hold those together in a unity. But I do think that there is historical precedence for that characterization of God, the God of the Old Testament, to be portrayed that way. But even if we don't do that kind of comparison, I do think that when we think of justice, we don't think of kindness and mercy. We think of what is right and wrong. And we think about what's fair. What
Equal,
equality, right? And so it's not about generosity or what is mercy? I mean, that is a word that we don't use often anymore. But what is mercy?
Well, it's kind of different difference between people who believe in the capital punishment and people who don't. There's a lot of fine, wonderful people that believe in taking a life, if
Mhm.
they took a life.
Mhm.
And then there's us that don't believe capital, that's right.
Mhm.
And I don't know either of us that are right,
Mhm.
you know, but that's kind of what you're saying.
Mhm.
You know, there's that twofold thing.
Mhm.
I don't know if there's an answer there.
Mhm.
Do you?
On the issue of capital punishment, or just in
Well, I'm
terms of
just talking about
the,
extreme.
you mean like what to do in an extreme circumstance?
Yeah.
Well,
Mercy comes there, I think.
yeah. Mercy is expansive, right? Mercy it's about something that is actually beyond our understanding of what might be right in a particular situation. And so, I don't know, are there any thoughts on that?
Last minute,
Okay, yeah, sure.
there were a couple comments. So how is our view of justice different than God's view? Going back a little bit.
Yeah, sure.
Arlene said ours does not have God's perspective. So,
Mhm, mhm,
Betty shared an example God gives even if people squander in our
mhm,
idea
mhm.
of what those things are.
Mhm.
So kind of the idea of who do we give money to. Mercy, we have Bill guessing unwarranted goodness or favor.
Mhm.
Beryl brings up restorative justice versus retributive justice, which we should have a whole long
Yes.
conversation on.
You're right.
Carlene shared in the absence of mercy, perhaps some are part of God's story or plan.
Mhm.
And Beryl ends us with a little prayer, mercy changes everything.
Right. Thank you. Yeah. And so I think, I mean, we're out of time, and I want to respect your time, but I've enjoyed this time together. But I think we're kind of left at a good place with this passage, because I know that when I was growing up, I often heard of this passage as sort of really isolated to a person-to-person kind of relationship, or, on a case-by-case basis. But where we've ended on kind of a discussion of justice and how this sort of should kind of inform how we sort of live together in a society, I think that's a good place for us to kind of end on and to think about, ideas of restorative versus retributive justice.
There's a good
Yeah,
book called Just Mercy.
just mercy.
That's
Yes.
true
Yeah.
story.
Right.
And
Yeah.
that explains, 127 people were saved from the death,
Right.
being put
Right,
to death
yeah.
by a young man who,
Right.
gave his life for that.
Yes.
I mean, there's all kinds of mercy, I guess. right?
Yeah. And I mean, even the title of that book, Just Mercy, God's justice is mercy,
It is.
right? And so it's not, those two things are not supposed to be separated.
No, I think so.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And it was good. Thanks to everyone on Zoom. Have a great day, and I will see you soon.